So when we last left off, a lot of people died. But I didn't tell you who. And also the series either took some steroids or went through puberty or something, because we go from short 150-page books to huge 300-plus page novels. But that doesn't mean these books aren't just as interesting, if not more. And so let's stop wasting time and let's get into book number 8. The Hostile Hospital. So this is the first book after the whole formula getting flipped on its head thing, and the Baudelaire orphans find themselves at Heimlich Hospital after hitching a ride with these volunteers who sing to the people at the hospital to make themselves feel better. And so it seems not all the parts of the formula have been completely abandoned, because Count Olaf does show up. Although you don't ever see him. He's only ever heard over the loudspeakers in the hospital, so that's new. Esme shows up again because she is now a recurring character, and she wears stilettos. And in case you were confused, a stiletto is a type of knife, and a stiletto is also a type of shoe, and so the heel part of the stiletto is a stiletto knife. Crazy fashion trends die hard. Going back to the whole critiquing aspects of society thing, I think this book critiques malpractice, I think. It's also interesting to note that Violet goes through what is essentially a lobotomy, but they don't call it that. And somehow this is going to get the Baudelaire fortune. I don't know, it's really not explained, but if it was, I didn't catch it. And I didn't mention this in the previous video, this also brings up a trend of when the Baudelaires are separated from each other. And so in book number 4, Klaus is the one separated from his sisters, and something goes wrong there. In this book, Violet is separated from her siblings, and something goes wrong there. And there's also a book coming up later where Sunny is separated from her siblings, and stuff goes wrong there. So long story short, things go wrong when the kids are separated. So at the end of the book, somehow the kids end up in Count Olaf's car in the trunk, and that leads us to The Carnivorous Carnival, book number 9. And I think this is the book that I realized, even back when I was a kid, that even though the page count was getting longer, the length of the story felt the same due to how much Daniel Handler describes in the books, if that at all makes sense to anyone. But in this book, we learn a little bit more about VFD, mostly that the tattoo that Count Olaf has is not an eye, but it's just a really weird font. We also meet some freaks in the freak show, because that's how the Baudelaires disguise themselves in this book. Oh, I should also mention that the Baudelaires disguise themselves, and so it's kind of a role reversal, another throw in the formula. And so in this book, Klaus and Violet dress up as a two-headed person, and Sunny dresses up as Chabo the wolf baby. So even though the series does take itself fairly seriously, it doesn't take itself too seriously. And the other freaks are a contortionist, a man with a hunchback, and an ambidextrous person. And so I think it's pretty obvious what Daniel Handler is trying to critique in this book. Mostly that people can be shunned away and ridiculed for the most ridiculous things. And in the end, the carnival is consumed by something rather hot, also known as the cleanser to some people. And the kids are almost forced to actually team up with Count Olaf. And it's kind of awesome, because at this point in the series, they're actually more helping Olaf than they are stopping him. And to them, that is actually incredibly frustrating, although I find it interesting. So, book number 10, The Slippery Slope, starts, and we find out that the Quagmire's third triplet is not dead. No, he's just hiking with these things called the Snow Scouts. They're heading up to the top of Mortman Mountains for the False Spring. And this basically equates to people dancing around a pole, naming a spring princess or spring queen, and watching as the waterfall melts. Riveting stuff, I know. But this is also the book where Sunny is separated from her siblings and a whole bunch of things go wrong. Count Olaf kind of goes back to his book 1 persona of making Sunny do a bunch of impossible chores that no way a baby could do. And also Sunny does something with an eggplant. Again, this series does not take itself too seriously. Also, Violet kisses a boy. But really, it's not described in that much steamy detail. It's just more mentioned in passing, but it does go to show that these kids are growing up. I mean, all these books here, they take place, I think, over the course of a week almost. But in the end, the kids are all brought back together, and then they are swept down a river. And that's the end of the book. not the series. So book number 11, The Grim Grotto, begins, and the kids are brought aboard a submarine called the Queequeg. And there's any critique of a social aspect, I'd have to say it's power or leadership. Because the captain of the Queequeg is like totally into his ways, and then his daughter is later totally into her ways. And the main thing to remember about this book is the introduction of the Medusoid mycelium, which is a deadly mushroom that can kill you within an hour. And the only antidote is horseradish. The kids also learn from the captain of the Queequeg that there are far worse things out there than Count Olaf. And so at the end of the Grim Grotto, the kids end up back where they started in book 1 on Briny Beach, and they find Mr. Poe. Now, Mr. Poe asks them, like, oh, where the hell have you been? And they're like, I'm sorry, Mr. Poe, but we can't be in association with you anymore. And so they completely shut him out. Which is good, because Mr. Poe is actually kind of a monster once you think about it. Why would you continuously not listen to kids, even though they've been proven right, like, 7 times? And also, he believes the Daily Punctilio above the kids, because newspapers never lie. Ever. And so book number 12, The Penultimate Peril, begins. And if you were feeling particularly clever, you could call this one the Countless Comebacks. Because pretty much anyone and anything that was mentioned in a book prior to this one is called back to. Which I think is very smart on Daniel Handler's part, because it proves that the whole series is a series and each book is not just a standalone entry. And also another set of triplets is discovered. One's good, one's evil, and one's thought to be dead but really isn't dead. And I'm pretty sure the social critique in this book is the justice system. Because towards the end of the book, the Baudelaires and Count Olaf are put on trial, and the rules of the court are so batshit crazy, it's unreal. Like, all the people have to be blindfolded except for the judges, and if you take your blindfold off, then you are in contempt of court. And then the Baudelaires assist Count Olaf with something so shocking, it just goes to show how far they've been pushed past their first book portrayals. And to me, that's the sign of a really good book series. If you can say that the characters have gone somewhere since book 1 to book whatever, then that is some good character development. Unfortunately, that's the only character development we've had through the whole series, just for the Baudelaires. But they're the protagonists, so I guess that makes it okay. I mean, what could be worse than having 3-dimensional protagonists? A 3-dimensional villain. And so we get to book number 13, The End. I am going to be incredibly careful with this one. And that's because there is a lot of good here that I want you to read and discover for yourself. So book number 13 is actually a lot like the bottle episodes of sitcoms. You know, the ones where it's like only the main cast of characters and like no celebrity or cameos whatsoever. There are new characters, but they really don't play into the story that much. And so the Baudelaires in this one realize that they are kind of flawed people. And if there was any social critique in this book, I'd have to say it is corrupt government. There's also a running theme throughout this book where it's finally realized by the Baudelaires that their story is not the only one in the world. That everyone's stories are connected somehow by some certain event or by some certain person. And Count Olaf has like this big cathartic moment where he's like, oh, you think your kid's story is the only one in the world? Well, think again. And also Count Olaf is shown to have some depth. And that's about it. Well, that's it without spoiling anything major. So, these books are very mature. Probably more mature than for the intended age group. But I know, as like an 18-year-old kid, I enjoyed the hell out of these. It was nice to be thrown into a world where there is so obviously good and bad, and as the series goes on, you can't really tell anymore. And there's so much gray area. And I think that's the smart thing about this series, that as it starts pretty black and white, as the series goes on, it is a whole mishmash of gray. And that comes as the Baudelaires learn more and more about the world around them. Having knowledge is a very scary thing, and with knowledge comes great responsibility. But again, this series is awesome, and if you were ever doubting about reading them, I strongly suggest you do. Although, unpopular opinion, if you've seen the movie version of the first 3 books, then you can skip the first 3 books. What was that? My thoughts on the movie? I liked it. This is Dustin signing off, but only for now.